Hey everybody, welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Featuring Bob Smith, formerly with Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and Joe Puccio of GenerationXY.com. Hey, we got a special one this time. Ed Helinski, the former editor of the original Victory and WWF magazines back when it was just 3 letters. And together, Bob and Ed have a combined age of... Do that again, you're really fired. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. What are you complaining about? I'm only... Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. My name is Bob Smith. You may remember me from my days editing Millinery Monthly. Get out your knitting. Oh, wait a minute. That's somebody else's. Here it is. I was with Pro Wrestling Illustrated for a week or two. Welcome back to the show. We have a co-host who's been in wrestling almost probably half the time I have. He's worked for some of the great wrestling newsletters. Now he has a tremendous multi-topic entertainment site called GenerationXY.com, which you better check out because the price is definitely right. He doesn't charge you for doing it. What's wrong with you out there? Hey, Joe.
Hey, Bob. And while I've never written or edited for Pro Wrestling Illustrated, I read it all the time, and I got it monthly on the magazine rack, and I was a big fan of yours.
And speaking of wrestling magazines, and that's -R or comma R, wrestling magazines, we have another famous wrestling magazine editor with us on this show. It's Ed Helinski, who worked for the WWF during the earliest days of their publishing arm. I'm going to learn a lot. I have never met Ed before. I have not interviewed him before this introduction. So I'm going to be meeting him for the first time. He kind of introduced himself to me online recently. And I said, sure, let's compare and contrast our careers. And this is a show that will certainly, I don't know what the effect will have on our listeners, but I will say this. If you like wrestling magazines, you'll probably hear a lot of insider stuff between me and him that you won't hear anywhere else. So I think it's going to be kind of cool. And I know Ed has been on the Brian R. Solomon podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle. If he's good enough for Brian, he's good enough for me, Jackson. So I'm looking forward to meeting Ed. Let's take a slight short look back at wrestling magazines. You bought them, I bought them. We all bought them, right?
We did. You know, I was a huge WWF magazine fan in the 80s. Even though they weren't as coveted, I guess you could say, as PWI, as Wrestling Eye and the Wrestling Reporter and all those magazines, I was a complete sucker for the glossy pages and just the photos in there. And I just always waited for it every month when it came out. First day it was out on the newsstand, I would pick it up. And I actually am pulling up I know we don't use X or Twitter too much anymore, but I am following Mr. Helinski on X, and it looks like he follows me as well. So while I've never met him, we do have a social media relationship. And this is going to be a good one because, like I said, those were the glory days of the WWF magazine back in that early to mid 80 era.
Absolutely was. They're formative days. I want to see how far he goes back to, because I remember, I think their first magazine was called Victory Magazine, believe it or not. That is the subject of what was told to me was a lawsuit from the company I work for. Because if you remember that the GC and London magazines were part of the Victory Sports series. And I think Stanley Weston threatened them with legal action over the name of their magazine. Which led to it then becoming WWF magazine. I don't remember if it was the 3 or the 4 back then. but they changed it right after that. Didn't
Yeah.
stop them from publishing, probably a little thorn in their side legally, but off they went. Throughout the history of the World Wrestling Federation and its various entities, I truly believe they always put out a very professional product with slick paper and great photography because they had access to their own stuff, obviously. And I've always felt that where wrestling magazines are concerned, a big selling point has always been the big color photo that you can take out and put on your wall, right? Just once, I used to have superstar Billy Graham on my wall
Yeah.
for some reason when I was younger. I've always felt that's a huge thing that for any and any wrestling magazine that didn't have a centerfold photo or a large photo that people could cut out, we're missing the boat. Missing the
Yeah.
boat. You can say all you want about editorial content. The photography, color photography on slick paper always meant something, I think. And again, I think that the pulpy magazines missed out on that sales factor. It was always more expensive to put thick paper in your magazines. If you remember the original PWI, the only thick paper was the cover, back cover, and the centerfold. The rest of it
Right.
was black and white.
Right.
They eventually went to all color, which they are to this day. But I think that a lot of magazines did that very well. WWF did that very well. George Napolitano's magazines had beautiful photography and
Mhm.
great paper and really nice big photos of the wrestlers. WCW magazine, which I also worked for, both the original and the second versions I worked for, great, big, beautiful color photos. You can't get that on the internet, and you can't get it reading online. If you want to put your wrestler picture up, you got to go out and buy a magazine. At least you did for a long time.
Mhm.
So I thought that was a big aspect of what made the magazine so popular. Nobody even talks about that stuff. No, man, photography is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point with WCW magazine. They also, you're right, they did a fantastic job as well, which was obviously years later than when WWF started it. But I was an avid collector of that one as well. It's funny because the pullouts and the photos, I actually never really was into putting them on my walls simply because I guess I was sort of like I had this old man mentality when I was growing up that I would buy these magazines and I didn't want to, yeah, I didn't want to mess them up. I was always thinking like, oh,
Right.
I have to keep them just so. And you want to know something to this day, I still have, if we're talking WWF magazine, I mean, I have many others as well. But if you talk in WWF magazine, I have every issue from, I want to say 85 until the very last issue they put out. Because even in the later years before it went under, or before they basically decided to stop it, look, I had no interest in reading it. I mean, I was already an adult, and I was a teenager. I really wasn't reading them, but I was simply buying it just because I wanted the collection. I just felt like I wanted to keep buying them. And then when they put out that last issue, I bought it, and I still to this day have them all. I've
Really?
thought I do. I've thought about, there have been a few offers. I know people would buy them. I'm thinking about selling them at some point, which obviously I'm not looking at them. Now they're in my basement. There was actually a period where I was trying to find the issues I never got before 85. The 84, 83, 82, whenever it started. And I did get a couple, but then I sort of stopped my search for those. But yeah, I do have them, and that's how much of a big fan I was. And I kept them in really good shape. There was definitely something to be said. And you're right. They were just so glossy. They just looked great. It's like you bought them. I always love that fresh magazine scent or feel when you first
You're
bought it off
right.
right. You
Yeah.
brought it home. You took it out of that paper bag they used to give you at the newsstand. You took it home and you just dove right in, for the next couple of hours.
I couldn't quit the wrestling magazines. I remember into the early 80s, I started at PWI in 88, but I remember 82 through 87, right before I started, I would walk to my local newsstand the same way I did when I was a kid and pick up a couple wrestling magazines every time they came out. I never stopped. I don't think I started with PWI. I thought it was like 35 or something like that. So I'm like,
Right.
here's full grown adult Bob, not teenage Bob, not college Bob, but it was just part of what I did. I enjoyed it, you know? The magazines felt like getting let out of jail, and I never admitted this until this podcast went on the air. I never told anybody this, but now I've said it like 3 times. My favorite magazines growing up were the Norman Kietzer books, Wrestling Review and The ring wrestling. And
Okay.
here's why. And I've been told by George Shire his real name is Keitzer. The way you pronounce he insists it's called Keitzer, but I'm gonna keep calling him Keitzer because everybody else in the world calls him Keitzer. I can't give it up. I can't stop. But
Yeah.
and I think Norman is still with us. I
Mhm.
will say this. The agate pages in the back of those were my favorite thing I've ever read. The same way to this day, if I pick up a newspaper and I want to read the sports, I will open the back of the paper and go to the box scores and the small type stuff. I love that stuff. I still do. I still read the New York Daily News for the agate to this day. I read it digitally. There's a PDF of it now that you can subscribe to. It's the same as the paper. I don't have a physical paper, but I still get the paper every day. It just says it comes out on the newsstand. I used to love to go to lunch, whatever job I had, read the box scores. I love that. But the back of the Kaiser books had wrestling results from all over the world.
Yeah.
Read it, and not just the results, not just this guy beat that guy. I'll never forget. Baron Cicluna beat U.S. champion Bobo Brazil on a fluke in 418 at the Armory, wherever, blah, 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 blah. And it would tell you a little story of the match. And then the next match. So people from all over the country were sending in these little match detailed stories. Nirvana.
Yeah, for
Loved
sure.
it. Loved it. It's the
Yes.
stuff no one would ever tell you. And every so often in those little agate results, I remember once, and this was totally against grain back then, and it was in the magazine. It said the masked executioners, and in brackets it said Killer Kowalski and Chuck O'Connor. You weren't supposed to do that back then, but they did it. They told you the real names. Not that I didn't know who they were, but they printed it. I'm like, how did that get through here? But they did it every so often. They would tell you who somebody was under a mask. I don't know how they got away with that, but they did. But I love that stuff. The rest of the book, I'm not even gonna voice my opinion on because to tell you the truth, I don't ever remember reading the front of the magazine. I remember reading the back of the magazine every time it was like reading the sporting news back in the '70s and '80s. Sporting news had a lot of agate.
Right.
I don't know, makes me the nerd I am, I guess.
No, that it I mean, I understand, like, what you were just saying about newspapers and being a big fan of the box scores. I was the same way. I mean, I grew up on the New York Daily News. I started reading it from front to back when I was, I wanna say, probably in junior high school, simply because my parents had it. It was always in the house, and I used to pick it up after school, and, I used to read the sports section, then I went to other things, and little by little, I just kinda got into it, which is what eventually led me into my journalism, love for journalism, but, yeah, the box scores were some of my favorite things to read, seeing what everybody did and, oh, this guy went 2 for 4 and he had an RBI single and he had a home run and this and that, and just reading the baseball box scores and those wrestling results as well. And we've talked
Yep,
about this before.
in the
They
Daily
always had
News,
the
yeah.
wrestling results. Yeah. And,
Mhm.
and I lived for that. And there was nothing much. It wasn't like they gave you any details. They gave you the result and this and that, but that was enough. That's all I needed. I mean, and funny, I'm even admitting this, but I used to cut those out because it was an era where there wasn't really any mainstream coverage of wrestling,
No.
no internet. And I used to cut them out. And, I made a scrapbook when I was a kid and I had all these little results and little things in newspapers and little features they would do. And it was cool. So I completely understand how that sort of, evolved, or it sort of bled into the magazines as well, and why you love those magazines.
I can hear the listeners out there going, "Bob, you fossil. You fossil. All this stuff's on the internet. You go on MLB and get your own box scores that way. You know you can do that." Yeah, I know you can do that, Jasper. But you know what else is true? They're all in one spot in the newspaper. I know I don't have to log on it again. One time I hit log on to that page and I'm right there. And secondly, the Daily News also publishes a graph of all the New York teams and what channels they're going to be on that night in one graph. I don't have, let's say the Mets are on one of the 18 channels that they show baseball on now, and I don't know which one it is. I can go to that graph and instantly get the information without have to comb the web to do it. So I know newspapers are passe, but I know they're passe. Give me my newspaper. I'll be dead soon. Let me have my fun, will you? Jeez. No, people rank on me for still supporting the newspaper business.
Well, do you that it's I'm curious, do you know anyone that still reads the print editions every day?
Every single person I know who's in sports. I work for a sports company
A
now.
print
Every
edition.
the print editions, I see them in the office. I go to my well, I shouldn't say this. I will say it. I go to my bowling league, and one of my friends there always brings in Newsday and the New York Post. He reads them every day. All right? Somebody's keeping the newspaper business alive. Nobody wearing short pants, but you know what? People who have read newspapers their entire lives still read newspapers. There is still information in newspapers you can't get anywhere else. Local town board meeting, you're not going to see, Ernie and Estes talk about it on Channel 7, but you might find out about it in Newsday. So enough, kids.
Yeah,
Jeez.
it's interesting because, admittedly, yeah, there was a point years ago where I just stopped, and I was never a subscription guy. I never subscribed to the newspaper. I always just picked it up on the newsstand. But there was a point, years ago. This was when I was still going into the office. I would commute into the city, and I would drive to the train station, and I stopped off at the 7-Eleven early in the morning,
Mhm.
and I picked up the paper
Sure.
and I put my whatever it was like a buck 25, whatever it was. And he said, oh, it's whatever he said, 250 or something like that. I was like, what? And it
Exactly.
literally like doubled. I'm not saying it went up a quarter. I'm saying like it almost like doubled
It
overnight.
felt like that, yeah.
And I said, are you kidding? And I looked at the cover and it was, and I said, you know what? I said, this is stuff that I can literally get online. I said, why am I doing this? I said, the paper is getting thinner as well. That was
Mhm.
another thing, is that it was getting thinner. I was like, why am I paying this every day? And I made the decision. I was like, I'm good. I left it there. And you know that I never bought another one physically, a print one. I never bought another one since. And this was going on. I want to say it's been at least 10 years, at
Well,
least.
this is the factor of the demise of the newspaper, is that printing costs go up every year. I know, because 'cause I've been in paper for the last 3 or 4 decades. I've done stuff that have to do with paper, right? All of a sudden, I realized that if I picked up every day of my life, I pick up, let's say, a News and a Post, both of them, because I could afford them. Put them under my arm, go read them at lunch. If I did that today, it would cost about $500 to $600,
Yep.
just Monday through
Easy.
Friday, not even counting the weekend editions. Now you talk about, where you wanna spend that $500 or $600. Do you really wanna spend $500 on fish wrapper? Because once you read it, it's done. It's useless to you. That's one of the reasons of the demise of newspapers. And like you said, they got small, the advertising revenue is going down. But yet I still wanna support that industry for a really dumb old school reason. We all still need independent media as much as we can get it, and we need real journalistic standards as much as we can find them, right? I just think newspapers are still important, and the way I do it is I subscribe to the digital editions, which are like a few dollars a year. You can see the exact same page as if you're holding it in your hands, but it's on your tablet, iPhone, or computer. Love it. That's how I subscribe now.
The only problem with that, the digital subscriptions, is when you're looking at the audience and you're looking at the people reading it. So I'm thinking of, like, let's say my parents. So my parents are both in their 80s, and my mom, up until a few years ago, would get it every day. My dad would go downstairs, he would go to the newsstand, he'd pick it up for her, and she'd read it. Her main reason, she used to read it as well, but her main thing that she would read is, she's a puzzle person. She loves doing the crossword, the jumble. The Daily News does its jumble every day and all this stuff. So she loved all that stuff. And she admitted that that's one of the main reasons why she still got it. And
Right.
even them, and I'm talking people that they don't care, they would just like whatever, even they got fed up. They would just like, Joe, every day we get the paper and it's like 20 pages. It's like, it's nothing. And we're paying so much money. Then they tried to do a subscription and they would get it to the door, and half the time it wasn't showing up. So they would just like, you
Right.
know what? We're not dealing with, so even they don't do it anymore. So I guess the reason why, long story short, is that I feel like with the print newspapers, there's something old school about that, where I think the older generation liked. Now it's kind of hard to get older people, I think, to get used to reading it on their phones or reading it on the computer as a print or a PDF or whatever it is. So I think that's also an issue, for young bucks like me and you, maybe not.
Oh, local newspapers are closing up around this country, like, probably as we're speaking, one just went out of business. Without local independent media that has standards, they say, if you really care about what your mayor and what your town board and what your police department and what the fire department's up to, and you have no way to find out, they're gonna run around and do whatever they feel like doing in real life.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
And this is why you need the overseers of journalism to come in and just not to berate anybody. There's another BS comment that people make about news organizations. Well, they're slanted, they're this, they're left wing, they're right wing. No, there happen to be small town media papers, of which I started, that were completely blind to any type of outside interference when it came to reporting that a car on Route 9W hit a dog yesterday.
Mhm.
That sounds like nothing, but it's still news that tied up the fire department and the local US, PCA. You know what I'm saying? It's like small stuff counts.
Yeah.
Somebody
I
got hit on Main Street. That's news. It counts. Or the town board couldn't meet on Wednesday because the mayor was sick. That counts. I think without local news, small people feel smaller, or they feel like they don't count, or because they're not in a big urban city somewhere, that what happens to them in a small town in Michigan or Utah doesn't count. No, it should count. It should mean as
Yeah.
much to them what happens to you as anywhere else in the country. And I think it's important to have journalism and it's important to have media. I'll get off my soapbox, but this is it. And this is not a political rant, folks. It's not. That's nothing to do with left versus right. It's like you can't have your local city fathers operate with no one overseeing it. You can't.
Yeah.
I can't tell you. When I was a Cub newspaper reporter, I would go to local city and town board meetings and I would be the audience, right? Locals don't go to these things. It would be the local newspaper. If they wanted to change an ordinance, they could do it in silence unless the newspaper was there. Then the newspaper goes and reports it to the people who then show up to the next meeting going, "No, we don't want this ordinance."
Yeah, yeah.
That is my ultimate argument for newspapers, or at least news media that covers the local area. I had a friend who's been a guest on the show, I won't mention his name. He worked in one of those companies, but it was digital. And it
Mhm.
lasted well, and it was good. It was in Florida, and it lasted several years. It was the local news, except for it was online instead of a paper, and of course, they ran into money problems, then they went to a subscription thing, and then that died after a while, and it's gone now. Yeah, the real news needs to be disseminated, but we've reached such a callous and crazy period in our life where there's always gonna be somebody going, "No, it's too Republican," or "That's too Democratic," or "That's left wing," or "It's right wing." How is putting a piece in that you have to renew your dog license by October slanted journalism?
I will say I just to add to that, I do have I've always had a soft spot for local newspapers, papers that you can pick up in the bank or at your local wherever it is, the bank, the library, or just anywhere, your local shop. I worked briefly. I did some writing for the Queen's Tribune in New York years ago,
You did,
and
really?
I did very, very briefly. It was sort of like right after I graduated from college, and I also, something we've talked about before, as far as Long Island based, I did some writing for the Long Island Ear, the Island
Me
Ear,
too.
which I know you did as well. So I mean,
Mhm.
I have a connection to some of these, and to this day, I still I agree. I like the local flavor. I feel like it's important. And just about a month or two ago, I was in Stony Brook, the Billy Joel Museum at the Long Island Museum. They have a Billy Joel exhibit, and they still had the what's it called? I believe it was Good Times, or it
Good
was,
times good times I
yeah,
worked for 17 years, my friend.
right, right. I think it's Good Time. I might be getting
No, it's
confused,
good
but I'm
times.
pretty sure.
No,
No,
it's
no,
good
but I'm
good
saying,
times.
it still exists.
Yeah, it's the only
Yeah,
thing
yeah,
that's
that's the
left.
one. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the one, because I know they still had it there, and I said, "Oh my god, this is." And the lady I was with a friend, and he was buying something, and I picked it up, and I said, "Oh wow, I haven't seen this in a while." And she's like, "Oh, take it," and I took it home and I read it. I read about the local stuff, and yeah, you're right. I mean, you don't get that localized
No.
flavor anywhere else, and it's important. I agree,
I mean, the selling point of Good Times has always been in the center, the local music calendar. You can go anywhere and find that information on the web now, but
but
there you
not
have
back
it all
then.
right then. In '69, you couldn't. In 70, 75, you couldn't. You had to get it through the newspapers, and that's it.
That's like when I was
So
that's like when I was growing up, and we used to all get. There was a period where everybody as a teenager, we would get the Village Voice,
I
and
love
the
the
reason
Village
why we
Voice.
got that, and I'll be honest, I really didn't look at much of it other than the back. they would always have that like 10-page section of all the music ads for what was going to be happening in the city.
Ah, the
And I'm
best.
talking little places. It wasn't the big ones. And again, back then there was no such thing as the internet. You couldn't look it up. So me and my buddies, I feel like it came out maybe on Fridays, it was Thursday or Friday. We would open it up and we'd go to the back and we'd just scan all the different ads, and we would say like, "Oh my God, look who's playing at the Academy! Look who's playing at Irving Plaza!" And we'd have all these bands that we'd want to see, and this is
Mhm.
how we knew. I mean, there was no other way to find out. You couldn't just go on your computer.
Dude, when I was playing around the city here with my band and there was a write-up about it or it mentioned in an ad in the Village Voice or whatever, I always saved those copies. I thought that was making it back then, you know?
It was
Right
cool.
next to
Yeah,
CBGB, my name is next to this other famous
you
person.
did.
I
Yeah,
wanted that ad. I wanted to see that ad. I probably still have some here somewhere. So, yeah, that's how the news got around. And news got around through the magazines back in the day. Our guest Ed Helinski and I will talk about that coming up. Joe, thanks for this always scintillating trip down memory lane, proving how old I am anyway. And well, we have a lot of shared experience. If you read Good Times or The Island Year, or actually wrote a couple articles for them, I did the same. So
yep,
it's like we have a lot of shared experience when you think about it.
we do, and I always love talking about this stuff, and it's nice
Yeah.
to also be able to talk about things. It's funny how it started with wrestling, and obviously that's the point of this podcast. But it kind of veers off into other things because
Yes.
there's other things in the world than wrestling.
Brian R. Sullivan quote: "Man does not live by wrestling alone." And
Correct.
Joe and I have had a lot of the same shared experiences. But one thing is for sure: we're both broke and unknown. So has it been worth it? I kid. I am the luckiest schmo you'll ever meet. How do you feel about that? I feel lucky. The fact that I've got to do what I wanted to do for much of my life, I think it's pretty cool.
It is. It is. I know. I feel the same way. I mean, there's always things you would hope that you could still accomplish and things that you would have wanted to do and this and that. But yeah, I feel overall, I can't complain.
Nope, me either. Actually, I can, but nobody listens.
There you go.
There's- I don't have a rim shot machine. I got to get one of those. So I want to thank Axel here for coming on and being part. Yeah, I noticed it. You schmo, yeah. He tries to make me laugh by putting a different name in our little studio box each time, and this time he has a Guns N' Roses T-shirt on, and he has proclaimed himself as Axel. I got news for you. Axel hasn't been that thin since about 1981. So, God, have you seen him?
I have seen him lately. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter as long as he can still warble. As long as he can still shout into a mic. That's the whole. Are they still together?
They are. He's still making the money. I'm telling you, the funny thing, my buddies and I joke around about this because they're one of our favorite bands. That was the era we grew up with. I mean, we worship these guys. And the funny thing about them is years ago, they were the band that everybody was dying to get new music, to get an album, to get a concert. And Axel was a recluse and you didn't see him anywhere. And now it's the complete opposite. Now those guys won't stop touring. They literally tour every year, every day, all over the world.
You have inadvertently come up with another topic for the outdated entertainment hour as you sit there babbling. Here's the topic. I'm just joking. Here's the topic. The musicians from back in the day who are still working, who have held up the best.
There you go. Yeah,
That's a
that's a good one.
topic. There are so many people out there in their 70s from the rock era who are still out there playing. Some of them are remarkably good, and that's going to be the
Mhm.
top of one of our future shows. So if you pay your ticket to see what some of these names will come up with, you'll get your money's worth. It's not faux, it's the real thing. And you'll be surprised at the number of people. I'm going to just bring one up right now because I had wind of him a few months ago. Al Stewart. Tremendous. He looks really old. He sounds exactly the same. How did some people made that deal with the devil, man? I'm
Yeah,
telling you.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we will do it. What you want to do a show, entertainment show? The people from at least the early '80s who are still out there touring, who are doing it every bit as well now as they did then. I think that's will be an exceptional show.
Let's do it. I love that topic. Yeah.
There we go. All right, so brace yourselves. Ed Helenski is here. We're going to talk more about magazines. grab yourself a couple copies, but don't get any paper cuts, or you won't be able to eat that Hostess King Don that's right next to you. Wait a minute, that's a dated reference too. They don't make them anymore. And since I think either Hostess merged with Drake's or something, and some of the names got crossed up. I don't know,
Bob,
but I know that they don't make King Dongs anymore. Do you remember
Bob, I
King Don?
will. No, I will have to
No,
admit
no,
here,
no.
I've never heard of a King Don.
All right, the King Don was kinda like that hockey puck, the chocolate hockey puck, and, chocolate on the outside with the
Yeah,
vanilla cream on the inside and chocolate cake. That was a King Don, and I think they've been replaced by the immortal Ho-Hos.
weren't these like were they like ring dings?
Yeah, they were just like a ring ding, yeah.
Okay, see, I remember ring
You see
dings.
what
I
I mean?
don't
But there
remember
was
the King
also
Dons.
a
Yeah.
King Don. I can prove it. I can prove it by showing you my last colonoscopy.
Well, that's okay, but I hope you don't have a King Don still in the fridge.
I'm sorry, I like that joke. We're the dumbest wrestling show on the airwaves, folks. I better get out of here before you say something else stupid. We'll be back in about, I don't know, 90 seconds. Hang on there. It's your one-stop shop. Great wrestling. WrestleCopia.com, where you'll find an armload of great wrestling podcasts. Some are weekly, some are not. All of them are great. Ray Russell brings WrestleCopia to you, including his own show, The Wrestling Memory Grenade. There's Regional Wrestling, The Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop, the Puro Wrestling Academy, Retro Wrestling Review with Gene Jackson, Dave Dynasty's Wrestling Nostalgia, Monday Warfare, Raw vs. Nitro, the Other Ship podcast, the Captain's Corner podcast, and much, much more. Great host, great shows. I guarantee you'll learn something every time you tune in to the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Where do you find all these shows? How about starting it this way? Just log on to WrestleCopia.com. There's nothing else like it anywhere. Welcome back. Regular listeners know me from my years with the wrestling magazine Pro Wrestling Illustrated. And I talk about it all the time. It's the best job I ever had. It was way back in the 80s and 90s. However, we had some serious competition in those days. And I have one of those competitors right here with me tonight. A very talented man who was involved with the magazines of the World Wrestling Federation right when they were just starting to have magazines for the first time. His name is Ed Helenski. Ed, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Bob, thank you so much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here as well.
Well, our companies were competitors. How did the WWF feel about the GC London magazines? We had Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler, PWI, all of them. How did they feel about our magazines?
They knew exactly what the work was being done there by Pro Wrestling Illustrated and Stu Sachs and Craig Peters and Bill Apter and yourself.
Mm-hmm.
They knew so well that they locked you guys out.
Exactly.
And Vince, as part of the thing with the McMahon family, they decided they're going to control the media, they're going to control their product, they're going to control their brand. And they locked out all the photographers, they locked out all the writers, people who had been, had relationships with Vince Sr. And it was done that if Vince is going to start a magazine, he wants to get a competitive advantage over his brand. And if you're in his position, you can't say you blame him. You guys did a lot of great work over at PWI, and some of the stuff that you guys came up with was just very good and equally unbelievable. Because some of the storylines and some of the stories that came out were certainly eye-opening and borderline things that came from the National Enquirer. I mean, it was just that good, but it was done with a lot of depth. With us, we had, back in 83 to 87. Now, mind you, I was only the magazine and publications editor for about a year. We had the magazine, but we also had the in-house program. Our print runs back then were 30,000 a month for the in-house programs and 50,000 for the magazine. And that was between subscription, I believe, between subscription and and newsstands. So, I mean, this is 83 to 84. We were just scratching the surface on going national, and Vince was lining up TV first.
Was it the Victory magazine phase? You were around right at the inception, as I recall.
That is correct. It lasted for 2 issues. One with Jimmy Snuka on the cover, and the second one was Sergeant Slaughter. But with Victory, the Weston people,
Mhm.
the masthead had Victory series in it, and so the cease and desist letter came from Stanley Weston's lawyers. And so instead of fighting this in court, they decided, let's change the name of the magazine.
Yes, Bill Apter actually explained that to me the last time he visited this podcast. I actually thought that Stanley making that lawsuit was a mistake on GC London's part and on his part. I mean, all wrestling media had been kicked out at that point. Why make the heat even hotter? It all certainly didn't bring ringside passes back any quicker, but that's the road that Stanley wanted to take.
I think it was more of a retribution of the boys being locked out on ringside.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had some strict rules regarding that. Even at Madison Square Garden, if anybody came out with a flash camera, we had the ushers throw them out. I mean, it went a little bit too far at that point. I mean, the normal fan with no sophisticated 35 millimeter equipment with the telephoto lenses, you know, everyday mom and pops and families, they were getting tossed out because of that. And then there was a problem with that. Steve Taylor, who was the photography editor, I remember had a conversation with Linda McMahon about it, saying you really can't do this because you're setting yourself up for all kinds of different lawsuits from people, and it's just a matter of time before that would happen. So I mean, it cooled down a little bit, but they still kept you guys out. So you guys did the other thing. You met the boys at the hotel and did the hotel room shots instead. I mean, that's how it worked.
Well, as you know, Ed, I started in '88, right? The other guys were already ensconced there for a long time and had gone through a few years of being locked out. So what's a mother to do, right? Well, we just we had to put our thinking caps on as a company and say, how are we going to continue to cover the WWF when we can't get near it? Well, here's what happened. It was more than just meeting some of the guys in clandestine fashion and taking their pictures. Oh, it was a lot more than that. What we used to do is, we would obtain tickets to MSG events through a variety of means, through people we know who bought them, through scalping companies. They were available in those times, waiting on the box office, a whole different ways of doing it. And we would try to shoot from about 3/4 of the way up the arena. I guess that would be the 300 series or 200 series of tickets back at MSG back then. If I remember that, it would be either the yellow or the blue seats, as I recall. So how the heck do we get in? We're carrying 35 millimeter cameras and long lenses, right? Well, what we did was some of the guys got really, really smart. They would take these long lenses and put them in a shopping bag sort of thing. But inside the shopping bag, there would be a Subway sandwich, right? The white envelope that they put the subs in. Well, it wasn't a sub in there. It was a 35 millimeter lens. So my guys would get up into the catacombs there, and they would shoot, put the thing between their legs, shoot, put the camera back down between their legs, shoot, put the camera down between their legs. Now, if you remember those days, there was a difference between real ringside photography and what we're doing for most WWF, because we had to shoot over the ropes or through the ropes, as it were, depending on the action. So it made things pretty hairy, but, we were able to get the job done. We had some very talented photographers. I shot quite a bit during my tenure there. I remember going to the Garden as a backup. I wasn't as talented as, let's say, Al Bello or Roy London or others who were on our staff, or a few other the freelancers that we used. But I knew my way around the lens, and I once in a while I get a really good shot. I could really, really shoot because I had done a lot of sports in my newspaper days. So that's how we kind of got away with covering the WWF in those days. And I dare say few were the fans that realized what was going on. They kind of accepted the photography as it was because, we had some really good photographers, and we were really thankful for that. And we just kept perpetuating as if nothing had ever happened. But I will say, It was really, really tough.
A lot of it was on the floor at Madison Square Garden where it was heavily scrutinized. Doing it up on the second or third level, I don't even think we bothered with that.
Yep.
The
Yeah.
things that was the big threat we felt was on the floor. But the funny thing, I got to ask you this: the WWF rings ropes used to be red, white, and blue.
Mhm.
Was shooting that, was that a problem for you guys? Because I've read where the glare was terrible on that, and it wasn't good conducive for shooting television. And for some ringside photographers, it was lousy. That's why they've gone to all white ropes.
I don't think so, but remember, I was kinda like a C teamer on the photography staff there. I mean, Craig Peters shot too, but not as much as Bill Apter and Roy London, who were the main guys when I was there, and he also had others that came in afterwards. But no, I don't recall that ever coming up in conversation. I would imagine it's more of a ringside problem.
Let me ask you this: were you guys also concentrating on the smaller venues, the high school?
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, wherever there was WWF or anything else, we were there. I mean, from the Nassau Coliseum to Tommy D's local shows to any promoter, we would cover it. If we had somebody that wanted to cover it or we had interest in maybe for a certain performer that was gonna be there, we covered every federation, every angle, every size of wrestler, everything we get our hands on. Granted, there were limits. I mean, we didn't have the budget to cover every single wrestling card, but when we had enough information about someone coming to town or, on the rare occasion there was a sold show or a charity show for WWF, yeah, we'd be out there. We'd be out there like wine and rice. It was to our advantage to cover every single thing we could because there's a lot of talent trading in that era, and you never know who was gonna show up in what federation, what organization, so to have a stockpile of photos of virtually every wrestler who was working meant a whole lot in those days. Let me ask you something, Ed, about what we used to refer to as lag time. When we worked on any of our magazines, we did Inside Wrestling and The Wrestler and all that other stuff. From the time we sent our magazine finished to the printers to the time it actually hit magazine racks all over the world, it was 6 weeks, about 5 to 6 weeks to get that doggone thing out there, which was a real problem when you're covering angles and wrestling and everything else. How bad was it for WWE magazine from the time you finished your work to the time it was out for people to grab off the newsstands or get in their mailboxes?
Ours was about I'm saying about a 3-week lag time, which was very, very good for that. And then if you think about this from where you're starting off, you're pre-planning what you're going to put in that one issue, and by the time you get it done, and to the newsstand, you're right. It is old news, and it's a long time. It's almost 2 months at that point.
Mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
and God forbid if you don't have any last minute revisions and you're bumping up on deadlines. I mean, I kind of laughed when we were starting this, and you said for somebody in the wrestling business, you showed up early, and well, I'm a newspaper guy. I mean, I'm a journalism guy. We lived and died by deadlines. You don't
Mhm.
deadline. You show up on time or you show up early because time's wasting and time is money.
So, Ed, how did all this start? How did you end up in the WWE? How did the magazine come about? Give me the whole Cook's tour, if you would.
I was editor in chief.
Mhm.
I was the only person really. I mean, I was the staff on the editorial side. Steve Taylor was the staff on the photography side. We were very, very smart. I had a gentleman named Jeff Walton out of Los Angeles,
Oh, yeah, okay.
and
Oh,
Jeff used to send me some stuff from the West Coast and wrestling from L.A. and where Fred Blassie was king at that point. But I started off in Western New York in the Buffalo area, and I grew up in a hotbed of wrestling. Buffalo had great wrestling, Toronto, Hamilton, and they would then get the guys in from Cleveland or Pittsburgh or Detroit, and put them on cards as well too. So you're seeing guys like Tex McKenzie and Sweet Daddy Siki and Dewey Robertson before he became the missing link, and all that stuff. I was a newspaper reporter, worked at a couple papers in the Buffalo area, got my journalism degree at Indiana University, where our football coach was Lee Corso, our basketball coach was Bobby Knight. and our swimming coach was Doc Councilman. And in the world of sports, those are three big names.
Mhm.
Uh, I got a job when the Buffalo Courier Express closed in 1981. I took some time off, went to grad school at Niagara University. Then I answered an ad for a sports writing job here in Auburn, New York, and came in. I took the job, and you talk about Mike Tyson. My big break was doing an interview with Lawrence Taylor because he came to one of these uh, banquet nights at one of the local churches here, and I got to be able to do an interview with him when he was very young and still on the. I would say probably on the straight and narrow at that point, still in his life. And then back in May of 1983. I'm a few months there at the newspaper. We get a press release that a WWF wrestling show is coming to Community College. Well, hey, that's in my wheelhouse. I'd love to do something with that. So you dig around and figure out who you need to contact, and end up calling down to Cape Cod, and I end up getting pushed over to a guy named Ed Cohen, who was booking the arenas and the venues. And I talked to Ed, and he really wanted no part of it. He basically told me, we don't do anything with mainstream media. We have our own thing. We have our own television shows. We have our own television stations. And we just like to keep it in the way we do it amongst our people, and they understand it. And I convinced him. I said, "Look, I'm just looking to do a respectful piece on wrestling. I grew up in the Buffalo area. I kind of understand it. Um, Give me a shot." And he said, "Okay, we'll do that. Whatever you guys do, please send to me." I said, "That's a deal." So the show was on a Thursday night. The place was packed. I think we had Sergeant Slaughter on the card. Sweet Hansen was on the card. Ivan Putski was on the card. It was
Mm.
a pretty good card for basically a high school / college show. And Friday morning, I ran a piece on it, talking about you remember when and how good, growing up with pro wrestling is not such a bad thing. And then on the Sunday, Steve Taylor made a picture page. Back then, if they didn't sell the advertising out in the newspaper, they made a picture page. So he put together a tremendous picture page. That Sunday afternoon, I sent everything off, mailed it off to Cape Cod, and by Wednesday, Ed Cohen's calling me, asking me that if Steve and I'd be interested in flying down to the Cape the following weekend because they're starting a new magazine and they'd like to talk to us.
Wow. Just like that.
Just like that, and and Steve is married. I'm single at the time. We fly down to the Cape and fly into Boston, then take a puddle jumper to the Cape. And a guy named Todd Dietrich picked us up at the airport, and he was Vince's right hand man on the Cape. And they took us, to the Mid Cape Coliseum, and we talked to a few different people, and they hired us that day. And we talked about money that day, and then we talked about the starting date that day. And our starting date was July 31st, 1983, and our first show was Madison Square Garden. And nothing like starting at the top.
Wow, just wow. I mean, gosh, I always dreamed of being on the WWF magazine, and to hear your story, that's the best story I've heard. That's number one. Number two is how Vince Russo got on the staff, but that's a whole nother ball of wax. But boy, that must have been really something, but really daunting too. I mean, you were starting ice cold. I mean, how did you face it coming into work for the first time and in a kind of an uncharted territory?
We looked at it as it's a stepping stone, thinking that it was journalism. Uh, Once we got, we both got off the airplane. It's like, what did we just do? I mean, and uh, I think it was a harder sell for Steve and his wife Angie than it was not for me because I was single. I was footloose, fancy free. Let's go, let's move on. I'm going from small little Auburn, New York. I'm going to the show. It's
Mhm.
kind of like a major leaguer at that point.
I hear you.
And the first show that we were there, Dusty Rhodes was on that card. Vince was running the show at that point. His father was in the background, and the person who was very instrumental with me to begin with was Freddie Blassie. Freddie took me under his wing immediately, and of course, you get to meet the professor Elliot Marin, the late great Elliot Marin, who he knew a lot of things and a lot of people. He really did. But you also saw the seedy side of the business where everybody wanted to become everybody's friend and could hook you up with anything that you wanted. And whoa, I said, a little bit too much for me. I'm 25 years old at the point at that time. It's just like I don't know. No, 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 no. But Fred Blassie taught me how to generate heat. He said, "Watch this, kid," and he just put his head went out through the curtain there from the gorilla area, and the things that he said, I won't even repeat on a podcast, but he revved up the crowd. The other thing that they impressed upon me, watch the amount of money change hands between matches in the stands. The people who gambled on the finishes at the wrestling cards at Madison Square Garden, it was unbelievable. The money that changed hands. You after a match, you would just see money being passed in the aisleway. It was incredible.
People gambling on WWF wrestling matches. I thought I knew a lot. This is the first that's hitting me. I'm serious. It takes all kinds. Anyway, I imagine during your tenure you became friendly with many famous names in the wrestling business, particularly in the WWE. I can only assume Howard Finkel was one of those names. Give us some memories of the people that you got to hang out with and work with and basically have fun with.
Oh, Howard Finkel, I miss him. Howard used to be my racquetball partner. Howard was so tight-lipped. He never let anything on. Howard was so good to me that he let me buy one of his Jets season tickets, and we went to Jets games for a couple of years. We had front row at the 10-yard line. Oh yeah. Howard could, and we went to he was a big Mets fan, so we would go to Philadelphia or the Shea Stadium or wherever we wanted to go. I mean, Howard would call and would get us seats within the first 10 rows from the field every time. I mean, because of the wrestling connection. So it was Howard, Eddie Cohen, was Bob McMullen, who was the first CFO back then, 83 to 84. We all played together on the softball team. Jim Troy, was very close to Jimmy as well too. At that point, we worked hard. We played hard. I mean, that was just the nature of the bit. You never knew what the day of the week was because everything was just rolling, and you worked a lot of weekends and went to a lot of weekend shows, whether it be Philadelphia or Hartford or New Haven. And this is when the business was getting goofy, when they were doing 2 shows on a Saturday, 2 shows on a Sunday. It was insane. You would do a matinee in New Haven, and then that night you're in the Garden.
Astounding. I mean, this all surprises me, really, because magazine editing is a long-winded, tough job. I mean, it's a lot of office work, a lot of typing, editing, taking phone calls, doing businessy things. So the fact that you would go from your office to an arena a lot, it sounds like an 18-hour-a-day job.
Plus, you got to remember, this was before any type of PCs or computers.
Right.
You're on the Smith Corona electric typewriter, and God forbid you're making typographical mistakes. It's just like you're getting out the old editing skills and straightening things out on the copy. I mean, this is well before that. That was the problem with it as well, too. It was a great opportunity to work for the McMahons. However, working for Vince was a no-win situation. And here's the reason. Here's where I'm going with this. The man's motor was going 20 hours a day, and he couldn't understand why people only wanted to work 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day. And, you ran the risk if you didn't work those long hours, you're going to get, he was going to find somebody else. Okay, fine, fair enough. But you were working all these hours and the money wasn't there. you weren't getting compensated for it. So, I mean, you ran into it got old after a while, and it became a grind. Then you had TV every 3 weeks in Allentown and in Hamburg, Pennsylvania. Those were always the promos were always the best part of the show. These guys doing the different promos in different markets. 3 weeks from today, so and so, so and so, so and so in Hartford. 2 weeks from today, and they would trot out a couple more different guys. Tonight's the night. I mean, the template was the template. Watching a guy like Andre the Giant, who became a dear friend, sitting in the back with a gallon jug of white wine in his hand with the glass ring, and he's sipping on it and sipping on it and sipping on it. And there goes the first gallon. And then he's on a second gallon. Then as Andre, he got his personality on at that point, and then they put him on camera. All these drinking stories they talk about Andre, they're all true. He was legendary in everything that he did. I mean, we met him after I got out of the business. Tim White, the late referee, was one of my best friends, and Tim also was an usher in my wedding, and he invited us to a show in Buffalo afterwards. And at that point, Tim was Andre's bodyguard and his handler, and we met at a bar near the hotel, or in the hotel, I should say. My wife and I, we were going to get married within the next 6 months, and conversation came up, and Andre came out and asked, "Can I come to your wedding?" And I said, "Sure, boss, anytime." He go, "What day is it?" And we said, "May 14th. And he immediately knew. He goes, "I'll be in Hartford that night. I cannot come." Like, whoa. But just to think of what he went through, he couldn't live a normal life. He couldn't sleep in a normal bed, except on a diagonal, maybe. That night, a couple of guys wanted to try to pick a fight with Andre. And Timmy Timmy just held them all off and said, "Not tonight, fellas. You really don't want to go there." And I just looked at Tim and I said, "How do you know that? How do you know that was coming?" He goes, "It happens every night." So he couldn't live that type of normal life. But these guys on the road, back then, I felt sorry for them. Yeah, they made a lot of money. A lot of them lost a lot of families, and a lot of them developed some really bad habits. It's unfortunate. That was the price they paid for glory and fame.
My curiosity's getting the better of me. I'm sure you can reel off a list of people you became very fond and close with during your formative magazine years there. There must have been so many, it would probably boggle most fans' minds.
Bob Backlund, when we came in '83, Bob Backlund was still the champion there, and he had his brush cut and clean cut, All American. I remember having a conversation with Bob, and I've mentioned this on another podcast. And Bob, straightforward, said to me, he goes, "I want to be a trendsetter. And you see my brush cut? I want people to get brush cuts like mine." Because remember what people did with the Beatles haircut and what they did? I want to be that type of role model to people. And I looked at him and I said, I thought it was goofy what he said. It's like, oh my goodness, he's starting to believe his press releases. He really is. And that always becomes a problem, not in wrestling, but in a lot of different places, especially in sports. You've gone too far. I mean, the guys back then, Roddy Piper. Piper was Paul Orndorff. Orndorff was always sincere. Orndorff would give you an interview in character. I mean, and he would heel it up, and oh my God, I had so much, my tape recorder at that point. I mean, it was good stuff. The other person who near and dear, and even to this day, a great friend is Sergeant Slaughter. Slaughter was, we had some good times together. We did a photo shoot in Washington in front of the White House, and the Secret Service came out and were going up and down the street in front of us and things like that. And it was a Sunday morning, like 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, where it's kind of quiet. But the funny thing is, they came by the first time talking into their cufflinks. They came by the second time talking in their cufflinks. Come by the third time talking in their cufflinks, and then they stop. A different set of guys saying, "Mr. Helenski, how long will Mr. Taylor and Sergeant Slaughter be here in front of the White House. Now, this is 1983. We came in unannounced. They've had us pegged within 20 minutes who we were. And it just floored me at that point. I said, "Yeah, we're almost done." And we left. We ended up going to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And of course, people were screaming Cobra Corps, yelling, Sarge, 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 Sarge. And it's a very solemn place. You just don't behave that way. And it said, "We got to get your shot, Steve, and we got to get out of here." And we did the Statue of Iwo Jima. And then we're driving around in my 1979 Chevy Malibu with the plastic seats and no air conditioning. And I got Sarge in the back, and there's a sign that said, "Hey, let's go to the Pentagon." So I'm going up the driveway to the Pentagon. Not a very smart move on my part. I got maybe an eighth of a mile, and here come three cars at me side by side by side. And I just, I had enough time to turn around, put my signal on, played it really straight. They pulled me over, and the MPs come up, hand on their holster, and state your business. And I apologetically said, "Hey, I came in here by mistake. That we're doing a photo shoot with Sergeant Slaughter. He's in the back here." And sure as shit, they look in, and Sergeant's, giving them the wave and said, "Eddie's men," and things like that. And they let us go. And as we're leaving, Steve Taylor's in the car with me, and Sarge is in there. And I said, "Guys, don't start laughing until we get, we're escorted out of here and we're a safe way away." But it was pretty funny that we did. But another person too, we were close with, was Blassie and the Iron Sheik.
Mhm.
Oh, the nuclear heat that the Sheik, and he loved every minute of it. We did a photo shoot at the United Nations. He had the Khomeini flag out. He's waving it in front of the United Nations. I'm telling Steve Taylor and Blassie's in the Arabic headdress, and Sheik is out there, and Blassie's yelling "Bali Bali," and you would see the office buildings around the United Nations empty out. People needed to come out on the streets to see what the hell was going on. And I said, "Boys, we got about 10 minutes before we get out of here." I'm double parked on the street waiting for these guys. They come barreling in. They're literally jumping in the vehicle. Sheiky's undoing his flag in the back seat. Him and Blassie are rolling around laughing so much like kids, thinking, "Oh my, heat on that was tremendous." And you've all seen the shots in front of the photos in front of the United Nations. That happened then. It's like, oh my God, the stuff that happened, it was crazy. Um, and then at TV, you always had, you knew you're going to be entertained by Lou Albano. Something was going to go on. Hey, Lou, we decided for our Christmas program, we were going to put Lou in a Santa suit, Captain Santa Albano. And Lou in his ways, did it up. Who else has a Santa with a rubber band in his cheek?
Mhm.
I mean, did we sell out that magazine, that program that month? Yeah, you damn right we did. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, it was just that goofy, Fred Blassie used to travel with him and basically looked out after Lou. Lou would get himself in trouble when he was drinking. I mean, Vince Sr. fired him several times, probably after every television taping, because they would get together for dinner afterwards, and Lou would put on the show and have a couple drinks in him and uh, do some, embarrassing things, and then would get fired. And the next 2 days later, he was back working again. I mean, but that was Vince Sr. at that point. I think Vince Jr. made it a point, as long as Lou was alive, there would always be a spot for him, just like Fred. There would be a spot for Fred Blassie. Um, I only had the opportunity for a couple months to know Ernie Roth, but I admire his work, and he was very welcoming. Welcome to the business. A lot of people back then, with us people coming in who were from normal walks of life and non-wrestling people, there were a lot of skeptical wrestlers and agents that didn't care for us in the beginning because they didn't trust us, and they were trying to maintain kayfabe.
Exactly.
I get it; it's okay, and I try to as well. I mean, at television taping, they used to have a goofy rule: if somebody says something funny, don't laugh. Put your hand in front of your mouth. Well, as soon as you put your hand in front of your mouth, they know that you're laughing. So, I mean, that breaks them up anyways. And it just, you got to redo the promo and it's just like, even if you turned around, but some of the promos were done very, very good. Um, some of the stuff that we did, we had a couple of things that didn't get aired because the heat would have been too much. There
Mhm.
was an airliner flight shot down by the Russians in 1983, and we had Koloff still on the roster. So we were at television taping. I said, "Hey, Ivan, you want to take a ride? We'll go to the Allentown Airport. And we'll be outside, the fence area, and you can cut a promo." And he agreed to do it. Um, and the sign said, uh, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." And he was in front of that, and Koloff cut a marvelous promo. But when it got played later on in front of all the boys, they said it's too hot. You can't air this. And sometimes back then they used some discretion. Later on, for TV ratings or not, that rule didn't apply anymore, and that discretion wasn't their better attribute anymore.
So I'm looking back at your career, and from what I know about it, it didn't last all that long with WWE and their magazines, but it's very impactful. Give me the rundown of what happened at the end and the way you felt about it at that point.
83 to part of 84, because finances at the company at that point. This is before WrestleMania.
Mhm.
And things were kind of touch and go. I mean, Vince had to pay his father back, $1 million in a year. So, and we're on Holly Hill Lane in Greenwich, Connecticut. That we're in the high rent district for the office. You're working and you're working and you're working and you're working, and they were giving you more to do. I mean, we were doing, they asked me to write a TV commercial for like Victory Magazine. I never wrote a TV commercial in my life. They asked me to go on radio on WHTZ Z100 Scott Shannon, and do the Garden recaps or Nassau Coliseum or the Meadowlands, and that meant that you had to go to these shows as well too. Plus I was doing all the press releases on paper, mailing them out to all these newspapers where the shows were going to be. So and so is going to be taking on so and so. It's a grudge match. It's a rematch. Yada yada yada. And you're hoping that these things get printed or they don't get printed. I mean, it's being a single person at the time. It was a lot of fun, but it got old after a while. And when they decide to make a change, it's okay. It's your company. It's your vision. You think you're going to get somebody else better. Oh, and come to find out, it's a merit badge when you get terminated by the McMahons. I mean,
Hmm.
everybody got terminated except for maybe Howard Finkel.
So I understand that later on you were able to stay with the company, but in a wholly different facet than what you were used to, but you excelled at it. Let's hear a little bit about that.
I was offered a position in the merchandising and doing the marketing up on that. So I took it. Venue sales and mail order sales were starting to boom. I mean, with the perfect vehicle with TV, at television taping, the first two rows around the ring got brand new merchandise given to them because they were being showcased on TV. And what would happen then is that they would see the ads and the programs in the magazines, or they'd come out with a commercial. The mail was just flooded with these orders and money coming in to fulfill these items. And the McMahons had the idea that we're going to be like rock groups, and we're going to make money on T-shirts and other stuff at all the venues. And so that became a multi-million-dollar operation right overnight. That was we were juggling with merchandise inventory, whether we were going to fulfill mail orders or we were sending them out to the venues. And when are we getting a new order in? And then, are we using this T-shirt, this person out of North Carolina, or this one out of North Carolina? What's the better price? And how quickly can we get the turnaround and just print it in and get it in house? And then T-shirts were being created like Macho Man or Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Roddy Piper. Piper, was huge. Anything with yellow and red Hulkamania flew off the shelf. It was just headbands, wristbands, Hulk posters, all this crazy stuff, and it was bringing in all kinds of money.
So how
You got to understand back then the minimum wage was like $2.35. I mean, and we were selling our stuff. A venue program was $3. A magazine was $5. A T-shirt I think was $12 or $15. It doesn't sound like a lot in today's age, but back then it kind of was.
Mhm.
And at that point, you have to understand something, Bob. I came from uh, a journalism background. No newspaper in their right mind was going to hire me after working for professional wrestling.
But I guess the point I'm trying to make is you can survive that, but it's hard.
Well, the other thing too is I'm finishing up in '87. A lot of that changed over right in the early '90s. So it was about a 4 or 5 year period where
Mhm.
then you could um, get back into a normal journalism. ESPN wouldn't touch me. Even though we did some television production, they wouldn't touch me at that point. And it's just like, all right, and maybe I'm a little bit burned out at that point, and I need to take a break on something like this. And I took a break on that up until about 10 years ago when I started doing radio out here in the Finger Lakes. Other than that, I mean, I got out of the business. I got out of the business cold turkey. No regrets whatsoever. That I've been flying under the radar for a lot of years, and that was okay by me, and okay by my wife and my family. Important to have a normal life.
Well, Ed, you've had quite a journey, and I'm really, really glad to make your acquaintance. You're well respected in the wrestling industry, and you've gone and do a lot of great things in radio and other forms of media, and you're still very busy. So, congratulations on everything you've ever accomplished. I wondered if you would tell everybody where they can find you, anything you want to spout out about what Ed Helinski is doing today. The floor is yours.
It's kind of fun. I mean, I'm semi-retired. I still, I'm a radio rep as well too. I come and go as I please. I pick my spots. It's a wonderful time to be in my life. It gets better. I'm now dabbling in wrestling again. I was hired last year by a company called Galaxy Media Events out of Syracuse. They own a bunch of radio stations. They do a tremendous amount of great events like Taste of Syracuse and a lot of wine and chocolate festivals in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany. And the owner is a big wrestling fan. So we did our first show called WrestleCuse. Catchy name, autograph show, and we had an independent wrestling show as part of it. So that first show we had was Sergeant Slaughter and Kurt Angle and the Nasty Boys and Jimmy Hart, Todd Beck the Gamer, Billy Apter. We got to saw Bill after all these years. Some things never change. You know that.
Right.
Um, Brutus Beefcake and Tony Atlas, and Atlas remembered me. Beefcake remembered me from way back when, and it was good to catch up with these guys. And now I've been rehired again to be the booker once again, and working with a couple of booking agents to see what talent will be selected for our second WrestleCuse, and that will be on November 15th of this year. So yeah, I get to dabble with this one more time and have a little fun with this, and I'm in constant contact with my friend Sergeant Slaughter every week. And on top of this, because of a podcast thing, my old high school back in North Tonawanda, New York, we created a YouTube channel where I did some podcasts with former players, and we raised money and digitized all these old high school game films going back to the 1940s. And we've got some film going back as far back as 1928. So, with all that work that's gone on the last 6 years with that project, I'm going into the North Tonawanda Football Hall of Fame as one of their contributors in September. So it's just like it's getting better and better, my friend. I'm like old bottle of wine that finally aged correctly. You know that?
I'm so very happy that by a fluke you and I were able to meet tonight and have a nice discussion about your wonderful career. And you've absolutely floored me with all your accomplishments and everything you have done and are doing. I get the feeling the best is still to come for you. It's an amazing thing. You're an amazing guy. How can people reach out to you to find you and talk to you and say hi and what have you?
A lot of people have reached out to me on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I am on X. I am on Blue Sky. So reach out to me. Uh, I look around to see if you have a wrestling background, and if you do, I kind of like give you the benefit of the doubt. I get a lot of crazy requests, friend requests, but if you can also drop a note that who the heck you are, it makes me understand a little bit as well too. I don't mean to be rude, but uh, you know, I need another jabroni or jamoke. Like I need a hole in the head.
I hear you. I don't want to be too loud about it, but I definitely hear you. So anyway, Ed Helenski, what a career. Thank you for being here. Let's talk again sometime soon. How does that sound?
Bob, I'd love to.
Attention, Gen Xers. If you'd like to explore the era that appeals to you, look no further than GenerationXWire.com. The generation who grew up with elite in entertainment, music, movies, TV, books, pro wrestling, and more finally has a one-stop destination for all their Gen X needs. From Aerosmith to Batman to the Killer Bees to the Twilight Zone, there's something for everybody at GenerationXWire.com. You won't find a more eclectic mix of pop culture content than at the leading website that specializes in the greatest generation, GenerationXWire.com. Check it out today. Showing how outdated I am, I'm going to quote Alice Cramden. We packed about 4 pounds of bologna in a 2-pound bag on this one. We really, really ran long, so I'm going to make the goodbyes short and sweet. Thank you, Joe Puccio. Thank you so much, Ed Helinski, once again. Having more fun than I have a right to have. I'll tell you that right now. But I will say this, outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. That's our website. Find out everything about the website. Join our fan club. Just check it out. outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. I'm going to tell you why I'm laughing in just a second. Write to us, outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Write to us about anything your little heart desires. Find us on Facebook. I'm the only Bob Smith singing with BB King. Find outdated_Bob at Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. I am laughing because I'm telling you right now, every aspect of putting this particular podcast together has been hellacious. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong this time. This happens in the podcasting world every so often, just this technical stuff that happens there's no reason for it. And I'll tell you something else. It is now 1:11 in the morning on a Saturday night, going into Sunday. It's actually Sunday. And I'm still working on this doggone thing. I have worked for hours and hours. It has never taken me this long to put a single podcast together my whole life. And again, it's all fluky stuff that's going on. Maybe I need to play the lottery, or maybe something good will happen after this. Who knows? Who can tell? I don't know. Maybe somebody will give me a Carvel cake for my birthday or something. In any event, and my birthday's no time anytime soon. This is Bob Smith, proud to have been with the PWI family of magazines. For myself and Joe Puccio, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. Ringo Starr says peace and love. I'm too tired to do the slow part. So in any event, good night.